Food banks in Toronto say they're at a breaking point, and for the Daily Bread Food Bank in Toronto, client visits are at an all-time high, and so are costs. The food bank estimates that before the pandemic, it spent around $1.5 million a year on food. Now that number is up to $1.8 million a month. The CEO of Daily Bread Food Bank, Neil Hetherington, joins me now. Neil, thanks so much for doing this. I saw your presentation earlier this week, and the numbers just staggered me. I mean, 270,000 clients in March, quadruple what you saw pre-pandemic. I mean, who's coming to the food bank now that you didn't see before?
You're right. The numbers are startling. So 60,000 before the pandemic, during the pandemic, 120,000 per month, and then now 270,000. And the face of the food bank is changing. We have seen an escalating number of individuals who have full-time employment. Their primary source of income is from employment, and that has gone from some 13 to 15% of food bank clients up to about 35% of client visits. So it doesn't, those on fixed income were already squeezed. They were already coming to the food bank. Now we're adding a whole new segment of individuals who just can't make ends meet.
What are they saying to you when they come in? I mean, we see the job numbers this week, 35,000 new jobs. The wage growth is actually good compared to where it's been, and yet we see this reality on the ground. So what are people saying to you when they come in to get some food?
Well, I think that there is a gratitude that we are here for those that need the food bank. And you're right, just in terms of from a macro perspective, things are upside down right now. We have never in the history of the food bank had it so that unemployment was at such historic lows, and the food insecurity was so incredibly high at historic highs. And so I am up a lot at night thinking about the difficult reality that if things change when it comes to unemployment and that starts to rise, just the impact that it will have on our food bank.
Right. I mean, you're being overwhelmed and overrun in a period of blistering job growth and even good wage growth, because just cost of living is so high even as inflation comes down, because food is remaining up there. So how is that affecting your bottom line? Because I don't know how your funding model works, but buying this food is no cheaper for you than it is for people at home. So how is it affecting your operations?
Sure, our funding model is very simple. We rely on the community 100%. We don't have government money. A lot of people might think that food banks are provided for by governments. That's not the case. It's all philanthropic. So we are squeezed on two ends. So on the one side of things, as food prices rise, and they've been rising by about 11.5%, that means that more people have to turn to a food bank to be able to get the necessities on their table. And that means that the lineups outside of food banks are increased, and our cost to serve those clients are dramatically escalated. You mentioned in your intro, the Daily Bread Food Bank used to spend $1.5 million purchasing food each year. We spend $1.8 million each month now on food, just to cover the client increases that are there and make sure that they're getting the same amount of food as they would pre-COVID.
How do you make that work? I mean, rough math, that's a 1,300, 1,400% increase on an annual basis, right? If you break it all down, or even higher maybe. I mean, how do you do it?
Well, we've got an incredible staff and volunteers who have risen to the occasion. They've engaged the community to be able to raise additional funds. We have a wonderful vice president of fundraising who's been able to do remarkable things. But you're right, from a systemic perspective, how are we going to do it? That's why we had this press conference. That's why we called on government to be the duty bearer, to say there are far too many Canadians who are having to rely on food charity, and we need to actually deal with it systemically. So we called on the province to provide the same temporary measure that they did during COVID for individuals on disability or OW. There was a top-up that was provided for each person. Things are much more expensive now, but their incomes have not risen really at all. In fact, those on OW still get $733 per month to survive on, and that's what the same number that they had in 2018. So we've asked the Premier to consider the emergency that we're in about food inflation and respond accordingly so that nobody needs to turn to food charity.
I don't know if you'll get that answer from the provincial government, and certainly there was nothing in their budget, I don't think, to address this. We did see something in the federal budget that's being branded as a grocery rebate. It's essentially an extra double-sized payment of the GST rebate. How much does that help the people that you're seeing coming into your operation?
So food inflation costs all of us about $600 a year. Now these are numbers that I think are slightly out of date, but it was about $600 per year per person. The federal government came to the table with about $250. So there is obviously a delta there of $350 that needs to be made up. But you know what? Going back to, yes, it wasn't in the provincial budget, but neither was COVID relief. And an emergency happened, and we responded. We came to the table. We came to the table between government, private, and the nonprofit sector, and we said, what do we need to do for the most vulnerable? And we made a difference. This is far worse than the pandemic when it comes to the difference between what people need and what their incomes are.
I wonder, though, you mentioned this is happening with good employment numbers, and everybody's warning of a recession coming later this year. And I'm not trying to be all gloomy on Good Friday, but when you look at a worsening economy potentially with declining job numbers and no clear sign that food inflation is going to abate, you're going to have increased demand and probably diminished donations, right? Like that's the other side of this. As people are worse off and their costs remain high, they're less able to give to charity.
That's exactly right. So we're in our spring drive where we do an annual sort of campaign of both food and funds. But this Wednesday at the press conference, I was very clear. I hope I was very clear where I said this isn't about food raising. It's not about fundraising. It's about getting to the core and the systemic issue, because you're right. It's not sustainable the way that it is. And so we need to make a call for government to be able to step to the table. And it's all three levels of government. It's not just the Ontario government. It's all political parties. They all know the solutions. We've provided them to them. Daily Bread has been a leader in providing research into good, decent social policies. We provided those policies. We provided what the impact to those policies would be. And now we want to walk back from the limb that we're currently all collectively on so that we can make sure that every member and community can thrive.
Are you seeing any improvement in the situation at all, Neil? I know we're watching sort of the top line inflation number, and that started to bend down since last fall to the point that interest rates can be paused. But have you seen any corresponding change in demand?
No, I'm a pretty optimistic guy, and I've been looking at all of our data points, and I'm afraid that we are not seeing anything. We've been looking at even just the weekly trends. Like, is there slightly, an opportunity where they've started to level out at all? And the answer is no. Our growth rate continues. We saw 12,500 new clients sign up for the very first time in February. We are now, just from a context perspective, and like these numbers are big. If you take the Rogers Center and you fill it about 7 times, that's the number of individuals that we're feeding every single month. It is historic. It's wrong. We know the ways to fix it, and we want to partner with all levels of government to be able to do that.
Well, Neil, I want to thank you for coming on with us today, and hopefully the people who can help hear your pleas, because we appreciate your time. That's the CEO of the Daily Bread Food Bank, Neil Hetherington. Thanks, man.
Thanks, David.